All right, so I'd like to welcome Sebastian Thrun from the Stanford AI Lab. He's going to talk today about winning the DARPA Grand Challenge, what it took to build a robotic vehicle that would race across the desert by itself.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris, for your short introduction. That's very much appreciated. It's great to be here among friends. I see lots of familiar faces, people I studied in Bonn when I was 15 years younger, PhD students, visitors. It's great. I gave this talk about 18 months ago, and I had, together with Mike Montemerlo, who's like the key person behind all this, and I had really nothing technical to say, so I made a lot of fluff. And I remember the red channel of the projector wasn't working either, which was kind of commenting on my quality of my talk. Today I have a little more technical stuff to talk about because we just did something, so I'm going to share this with you. But before you get into it, this is really the work of a team of people at Stanford University and Volkswagen, Mo Davidoff, and so on. I'm just the spokes-organ who's taking all the credit and some of the money, but I didn't do much work. So let's see, who here has heard about the Grand Challenge before? Okay. It's one person who hasn't. Okay. There's a video. I have a couple of them with me if you want some. That Nova made. It's a really nice summary. I'm going to tell you the story of the Grand Challenge and some of the technology went into it and some of the reasons why we do this in the next, 45 minutes or so. So the US government has had an interest in unmanned ground vehicles for several decades. Reason being that at current battlefield, lots of people die because, for example, roadside bombs and so on. And they're funded in the order of about $500 million of research work at universities and companies over the last couple of decades on this topic. And somewhat cynical, if you look at what they got out of it, because you know how defense contractors work, they're the opposite of Google. They got relatively brittle systems that would require often multiple interventions per kilometer driven, and they would often in off-road terrain go as fast as 10 miles per hour, but not faster. So they were not really operational. So DARPA decided to construct a complete new funding model, which is double the speed, no human intervention whatsoever, and no funding. So, and see how far we can get without funding, since the funding approach didn't quite get us there. So they created the DARPA Grand Challenge. Originally in 2004, in March was the first race. Went originally from Los Angeles to Vegas, but then they figured out there's too many kids in Los Angeles, so you can't do racing over here, so they started in Barstow. That's the place where Kill Bill 2, when Uma Thurman gets out of the grave, you know, that's there, okay? And Prim is like the first casino behind the border for people who can't afford the fuel to go to Vegas. So it's really kind of a interesting countryside. And they picked a route right north of I-15, which is a power line sport road, and here's some pictures that they posted before the race. The idea was to build a robot that can go by itself. You'd give it GPS breadcrumbs, about 2,700 of those that define the route, but they define it only very inaccurately. So as you go, you have to basically make lots of steering decisions and velocity decisions. There's no person involved, right? So the machine has to run by itself. So the moment the race starts, you as the designer go back to a tent, have a beer or whatever, and the robot has to do everything by itself. So it's somewhat unprecedented in that in the history of robotic driving, there's never been a vehicle going 142 miles by itself. So that was the challenge. First Grand Challenge was a bit of a disappointment. This is a video that DARPA posted.
30 seconds from history.
It gives you kind of a feel for what type of people showed up.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sandstorm.
Was anybody here at the first Grand Challenge physically there? Wow, cool. 2 people, great. So you found a mix of people, top-notch research universities like Carnegie Mellon, who's clearly a big player. Companies, mostly defense companies, who wanted to make sure that their work is being acknowledged. And a good number of people who would just refer to as maybe car nuts, people who had no clue about robotics or building large-scale systems, but figured they have a computer in a car. This is a local team, Digital Auto Drive from Silicon Valley. They did a good job. This is a defense contractor that only practiced in the parking lot when they had a control problem. See, this car flipped right over here. So DARPA shot of the video.
And off we go.
It was the biggest competitor, Terramax, out of Iowa, defense contractor, 30,000 pounds.
Military vehicle.
They had a bit of a backup problem. They backed up more than they went forward. And then the smallest, anybody here who studied at Cal? Okay, if you're from Cal and you want to leave at some point during talk, it's fine. Cal had the smallest entry, Anthony Lewandowski. So Anthony, I have a lot of respect for him, and I'm going to tell you later how cool it is to build a motorcycle. But I asked him after the race, what's your goal for next year? And he said, I'm going to double my performance, which most shareholders are excited about. So the Grand Challenge finished. You can tell this is not a serious talk. Finished at mile 7.3, and many of the journalists said it was a complete failure because it was only 5% into the course. But DARPA had put the hardest stuff up front and some very serious mountainous terrain. And Carnegie Mellon, who had the best performing vehicle, went all the way there. Basically, blindly followed the GPS points, got about a 1.5 meter error in GPS, and drove onto this ridge over here, got high centered, burned up a rubber tire, and that was the end of the race. And it actually was over before most of us woke up that morning. California. So in 2004, we had 106 teams competing. And in 2005, when Stanford decided to join, we had 195 teams, which is a little comparison here, of which Stanford is over there somewhere. It's misspelled with a D. That is something about the average typing skills of certain agencies. So we had about a year, roughly, maybe a little more than a year, to put together a car that could drive itself. And we started thinking, well, it can't be that hard. I mean, we drive cars all the time. And then as we started getting into it, we realized there were certain difficulties that we had to overcome. So we'll tell you about those. So this is our timeline. And I started at the very beginning, right over here somewhere. So in the very beginning, we had a dedication to build a team. And Mike Montemerlo was my postdoc, was the kind of the internal team leader with a couple of grad students. And did most of the software stuff. But we had no vehicle and no money and nothing. So we had to find a way to finance an internal team on a crazy idea. So the very first thing you do as a college professor is when you don't have money to hire people, you teach a class. And you give the students course credit, right? So they pay tuition to take your class. And you teach your class, you recoup your salary and give them an A or a B or whatever. So we created a course, DARPA Grand Challenge, which was a project course without a syllabus, without any materials. It's just one thing. Okay, we're going to be 20 students, and by December 1st, we have a car that's going to drive itself 1 mile to the Mojave Desert. Yeah, and students signed up. 40 came for the first class and 20 for the second, kind of an exponential decay, and they stayed on. We then got in touch with Volkswagen to give us a car. So they gave us a Touareg. In fact, they gave us a number of those over the time. So here's one of the students, David Stavens, who was a key player in the car. And very first thing we did is equipping the car with the type instrumentation that you usually use for these kind of projects. Everybody who does autonomous navigation in the air or on the sea equips robots with inertial guidance systems, which are nothing else but a pairing of a GPS receiver that tells you roughly where you are, and an inertial measurement unit that measures accelerations and rotational velocities, so you can make interpolations between different measurements of GPS. Kind of gives you roughly a feel for where you are. And this is actually something we work with various people on. Then we started devising a very simple control mechanism to get to the state where the previous Grand Challenge field had been. And the most basic question is, suppose you're given a route defined by GPS breadcrumbs by DARPA, and you care about controlling the vehicle so it stays on the route, how do you turn your wheels? Right? So it's like a one-dimensional decision every driver makes all the time. A very simple controller that actually we used until the race day was designed by a fellow named Gabe Hoffman, which goes as follows. If you're on the reference trajectory, then make your front tires parallel to that reference trajectory. Then you stay on it. But if you get off it, then measure your cross-track error and steer in proportion to that cross-track error. So you can see the wheels being slightly turned in because we have a certain amount of cross-track error. That makes you go back to the course. Okay. If you do that, you get a bit of a drunk squirrel because you start oscillating left and right. And for those of you who have a control background, and you do PID control, differential term for dampening, and integral term for drift, and so on. But essentially, that's the picture. Okay. So we put this together, and we tested this in early November in Arizona on what Volkswagen has a big proving ground there. And this is basically driving blindly after GPS points, kind of the same that most of the competitors in the previous year had achieved. And you can see it's going 25 miles per hour, relatively fast. The steering wheel is relatively calm. Bit of oscillation still. So we're able to trace these points really, really well. So we basically reached the level of 2004 in this class in about 5 weeks. Stanford students are amazing, as I'm sure you all know. And then we had to worry about collision avoidance, and then things became much more interesting. So we put lasers on the roof. For those of you who don't know how lasers work, here's my little animation. So a laser beam goes into a rotating mirror that gets directed into the environment, onto a planar area. The laser light goes out, it's being reflected by objects, being received by the sensor. We can measure the time of flight and thereby deduce the distance. If you like that animation, it's all stolen from this video over here, okay, without permission. And then you do motion planning. Motion planning could be as simple as the following, which was Mike Montemello's brainchild. Basically, you try to follow a road. You can go straight, but if you go straight, you might hit an obstacle that your laser sees. And then you can, over time, gradually vary the lateral offset to your reference trajectory. For example, you can say, over here, I want to drive a meter more to the left side. And then you can look at these trajectories, roll them out, and evaluate them to the extent of which they violate safety constraints or maybe corridor constraints. You have a corridor in which you have to stay. And if you do this at different speeds, you can look at fast swerves or slow nudges and get a sense as to how to move. And essentially what Stanley did is that. So here's our first test. It's not exactly desert, it's more like a parking garage at Stanford, but that's the best we could afford. So here's a really evil desert obstacle that pop up in the map as little dots. Another one. And still within the class, we actually had a little system that could sense these things and drive around them. And not in a very elegant fashion, but in an effective fashion. So we took that to the desert. Here's my class in Barstow, California, December 1st. And we did our test. And the test was a bit of a disappointment. We managed to get our 1 mile driving. In fact, we drove 8.5 miles, about 1 mile further than Carnegie Mellon had driven, which, of course, we kept talking about to our various friends in the field. But a mile later, just after Carnegie Mellon failed, we failed as well, so we didn't get very far. And the car, because of the many, many different obstacles, got pushed around a lot. This is where Carnegie Mellon failed, so we love to show this video. You know, look, that's exactly where they burned up their rubber tire. We have a lot of respect for Carnegie Mellon, I should say. But we basically failed back there, which we don't show. But the many obstacles in the desert pushed the car around a lot, and it was really hard to go fast. We could only go like 8 miles per hour, and Carnegie had gone much faster than us. Too slow for race speed. But we had something together which was a first end-to-end system within 2 months, and we could now go and critique it and improve it. So the idea was, from that point on, we would only pick modules that wouldn't quite work, like pretty much everything, and then replace them by a better module so that eventually we had a good driving car. The next thing we did is we actually got together a real team. And these are the people who actually did the work. Mike was the software chief. The people from Volkswagen, Sven and Cedric. Mo Davido is a local venture capital firm that gave us money. We told them they have no return of investment. They didn't mind. And then we had a computer vision team, and we had a planning optimization team, and so on. These are all Stanford students mostly, and some alumni and so on. And a lot of fun just drawing together about 60 people to do this. And we got sponsors, right? So Android is one of the sponsors. They provide all kinds of stuff like software, vehicles, Karma, caffeine, what have you. And we came up with an architecture. This is the most boring slide I have, but it summarizes all of Stanley's architecture. It goes from sensors to perceptual models to do state estimation, to planning and control modules that control the vehicle, and then to an interface. And it's all pipelined in real time through the system at about 300 millisecond delay from left to right. In fact, for those of you who have an AI background and were engraved in the artificial intelligence debate as to what the right cognitive architecture is, Rod Brooks in the 90s came up with this subsumption thing, how to organize robots, and cursed the traditional approach, but we are completely in the traditional corner. So we're entirely back in the 80s in the way we build these systems. But in April, we had the team together. We started improving our software modules, and we had to face our first big hurdle, which was called site visit. DARPA had 195 submissions or entries, and they wanted to find the 40 good ones that they would then further support all the way into the race. So we had to submit a video. This is our video, and again we show the place where Carnegie Mellon failed, just by coincidence. And we weren't the only ones. So Carnegie Mellon had a really strong team. They actually were really smart. They read the rules and realized you can actually submit 2 vehicles, not just one. You could double your chances. So they actually built a second car, which we didn't,
racer, but the similarities
based on a Hummer, which was thought to be a really sturdy off-road vehicle, and submitted their entries, and they passed with flying colors. And just to give you kind of a feel for what type companies and what type individuals participate, I have 2 more videos that I want to show you. The first one, these were like more car nuts, kind of. So some people clearly had like one thing they were really good at, like maybe building a tracked vehicle, and then saw the challenge come along. And they didn't think of it as a software challenge, it had nothing to do with intelligence, just if you're the fastest in going from 1 to 65 miles per hour, that's enough. Software doesn't really matter. And they had the... And then the next one is the most watched video. I've been told some government people saw it every evening. I'm just going to play the beginning. It's on the web. And they did actually quite well in the race.
The DARPA site visit video for Axion Racing's entry into the 2005 DARPA Grand Challenge. We want to thank the United States government, DARPA, its director, Dr. Tony Tether. Hi, Tony. Thank you, the viewer.
So you can tell, these actually, they were the only team that brought an inflatable palm tree to the race. And it was really cool. We weren't quite as humorous, I guess. We were just engineers. What?
Whose team was that?
It's called Team Axion. It's coming out of, I think, Louisiana or something. If you go on Team Axion, you can buy calendars with these girls. These girls were in Fear Factor before they... They're twins. So this is the first time we had the car without a driver inside. This was the site visit. DARPA had given us a very short course, 200 meters, and placed an evil desert obstacle, also known as trash bin, and the car had to drive around it. And it never was really elegant in doing it. It was very short-sighted, but it was very effective. I'll tell you later on why this is the case. In fact, if you look from it from the overhead, this is a map that the vehicle builds, which I'll tell you more about in a second. White means drivable, black is unknown, red are the little traffic cones over here. And you can see the car kind of projecting in steering direction. And over here, you're going to see the evil trash bin coming up. Of course, the car doesn't, and you can see the steering direction. Okay. Good, no one's in the car. Okay, so that led to 43 semi-finalists, of which Stanford was one, so we achieved our goal. And so was Carnegie Mellon and Carnegie Mellon up here, called Red Team, after their team leader, Red Whittaker. And then we went into a phase where we really tried to hammer out all the bugs. So the goal was to build a system that could run hundreds of miles without intervention. So at the time, we could do about a mile, and then we had to intervene, and we had to go to at least 500 miles without intervention. And that turned out to be tricky, because desert is actually complex, and it's very alive, too. There's lots of rabbits and birds and so on that we killed along the way. So we did a lot of testing, just going hang out in Barstow at 125 degrees in the summer. Rosemary, who was back there, has been on some of the trips. Driving over all kinds of terrain. And to be a little more technical, I'm going to show you the typical stuff that would happen. We would drive in a car, and the car would do just fine. We all sitting there chatting, not paying attention. And all of a sudden, even difficult terrain like this, it will go crazy out of no apparent reason and drive maybe into a ditch or a berm or down a cliff or something. So we would not be able to catch it, and the car wouldn't be rescued. What happened is we went into this all kinds of interesting data processing problem where the car, in an attempt to model the environment, would model a road just fine, as shown over here. And all of a sudden, you get these massive obstacles that are completely fake, and the car just drives off the road and kills us all. And even though Stanford has a steady supply of great students, we can't sacrifice them all. So let me tell you a bit more technical what's under the hood, and tell you about 3 different innovations we made, or 3 different things we've worked on during this race. One is laser interpretation. So I told you about the laser going out and scanning the environment. As you scan the environment, at every point in time you get a scan line, about 70 times a second, and you can assemble them into a 3D model using your GPS inertial pose estimation, knowing where you are. It's 60 informations, X, Y, Z, and it's also your yaw and roll and pitch angle of the vehicle. And as you do this, you get these point clouds. There's 4 of them here, 1 for each laser, 1 in blue, 1 in yellow, 1 in green, 1 in red. And now you have to interpret the data and ask where's the road. Like there's a big mountain over here, there's a big ditch over here, and so on. The way Stanley does this is AC uses a scanning laser to build a 3D model and does inference over the 3D model. So here's our laser going forward, scanning the road. If there's a big pole in the way, the pole is being scanned vertically. And if you start comparing the bottom point to the top point over here, then you realize there's a z elevation difference, and that constitutes an obstacle. No more or less than that. It's very, very simple logic. Okay, so something vertical could be. Stanley was very environment friendly. Like there's a tumbleweed, it would drive around a tumbleweed. Anything would just drive around. If there's an insect flying up, it would drive around the insect. Never mind. But that was the logic. Now the problem was, if the vehicle pitches, then the scan line goes in reverse order of the driving. So you might go forward, but the scan line goes backwards because the vehicle pitches down. And as a result, the terrain gets scanned twice. And sometimes the scanning is consistent. So when your pitch estimation is really accurate, you might get these moments over here, like this one over here, where the z error is not large. But sometimes if your pitch estimate is very inaccurate, when your vehicle pitches a lot, for example, you project out where the scan point is. So even a quarter-degree error in your pitch angle has a huge effect on where you think that point is. So you have to be really, really certain about your pitch angle, which is way beyond what the vehicle could do. So here's an extreme case of extreme pitching. And this is the resulting trace of one of the lasers on the ground. And you can see this is a flat terrain, but if you compare this point to this point, just because of your pitch angle error, you think there's an obstacle. Okay, so that was a bit of a bummer, because every couple of miles, the car would just completely without motivation pitch a little bit and then go off the road. And then pitch a little bit. And so we were really good at making a video that looked great, but we couldn't really drive, at least not the Grand Challenge. So this is where our first probabilities came in, which, of course, you know more about probabilities than me. But the classical way to look into data is just taking rock solid and say they're all correct, right? So you have a sequence of poses in this kind of little Markov model, and they're being fed by your inertial system, and then you extrapolate where the points are in the physical world, and then you can compare two of these points, for example, and ask yourself, for two nearby measurement points, do they have an elevation difference of 15 centimeters? But in reality, these are erroneous. So the truth is, there's error between these pose estimates over here, there's error between these pose estimates over here and over here. So what you really got to write down is a probabilistic formula that says, given all this error over here, what's the probability that these 2 points are really in vertical alignment of 15 centimeters? And then you only accept your obstacle if that probability exceeds a certain threshold. So if you're really confident, let's say 95% confident that there's an obstacle. Now the problem with that was that now we had this really complex probabilistic model that we had to kind of feed and populate. And no manufacturer ever tells you what the actual error of their units is. So you have to guess it. So how do you guess what errors you have in your unit to get this test right? Well, you could sit down and measure it, which is almost impossible. So we decided to do something completely different. We said we can do this in a day by using discriminative machine learning. Now, how does this work? So discriminative machine learning in this case works the following way, and it's not very sophisticated. If your error model is correct, then it's going to label flat terrain as flat and non-flat terrain as non-flat. Okay. Now, how can we train a machine learning model to do this? Well, let's label terrain. How do we label terrain? Well, you can have a grad student sit there and label every pixel and say this is an obstacle, this is not. Or you could just drive somewhere, declare what you're driven over as flat because you chose to drive there, and then kind of falsely assume that the side stripes over here are non-flat because there's lots of bushes. It's not quite correct, but good enough. And then you can tune your parameters inside the model so that they minimize the number of pixels here that are labeled drivable and maximize the number of pixels over here labeled as non-drivable. And this is just a discriminative machine learning algorithm where you search in the space of your Markov chain parameters, blah, 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 to find the optimal error model. So you basically learn the Markov chain using discriminative learning. And the results were actually quite amazing. So it might look insignificant for you, but for me it was a big day. You can see over here fake obstacles. This is side by side, before and after. And over here, no fake obstacles. But with this error model in place, with a probabilistic test for occupancy, and our machine learning routine of a couple of minutes of training, we were able to basically eliminate all false positives. There's one over here, it's missing over there, without affecting the correct positive rate. In some data sets, we went down from like 12.6% false positives all the way to like 1 in 50,000. So all of a sudden, we could actually sense terrain. And it was surprising. I mean, I published books on probabilistic robotics, and I've forgotten all about this when I built this car. And then we realized, wow, probability is actually your friend. So they kind of come in again. The next thing came up because the lasers don't look very far. They only look like 20 meters distance. And we wanted to drive really fast. And to drive really fast, like 35 miles per hour was our set goal. We had to look further. We couldn't stop in time before the laser caught an obstacle. We measured that. So this is a distribution of speed limits in the original Grand Challenge. And you can see it goes all the way to 60. But if you go to 35 miles per hour, you have most speed limits caught. These are DARPA dictated speed limits. So we did something else, use the camera to find roads. And you think that a camera, of course, can see all the way to the horizon. So the question then becomes, how do you extract from a camera image where the road is? Now, after 50 years of AI research, there got to be a piece of software that finds your road in the camera image, right? And AI just turned 50 this year. We should be able to do it. It turns out it's not easy. There's no paper that I know of that can find you all the road in all camera images. Okay. Now, we started something simple and said maybe roads. So here's a bit of diversity of roads. Just give you a feel for it. This is all from the original Grand Challenge course in 2004. We started saying maybe roads are brownish. Okay, so take a region of the color spectrum and call it road, right? But of course, then you drive over a paved road that's black and doesn't work, right? Or you fight over stuff like this over here. And then we said maybe the road is the smoothest thing in the image. Like the less smooth it is, the less you want to drive on it, right? So the smoother it is, the better for you to drive. Yeah? The smoothest thing in the image is the sky, unfortunately. So it's kind of a bummer. And then Henrik Dahlkamp and a couple of folks from Intel came up with a decisive idea, which is we don't have to solve all of road finding. We just have to solve some of road finding, which is, given that we know how road looks here, maybe we can detect road over there. By that I mean the following. We already had a laser system in place that was perfectly capable of finding roads, but too late. It could find roads right in front of the car, but not further out. But you could extract from this little video here, from the laser system, we might be able to extract samples of how the road looks right now. This is a laser system. It doesn't look very far. We could extract a region that's drivable and use all these pixels over here as training examples for a mixture of Gaussian, and then apply that mixture of Gaussian to the entire image in the hopes of finding the road all the way to the horizon. And that's the typical result here of a mixture of Gaussian, where red means drivable and I guess blue means unknown. And all of a sudden, we could bootstrap our perceptual range from the short laser range using this little machine learning trick all the way to the horizon. And that was a big day too, because all of a sudden we could drive faster and we could see stuff in a longer distance. It's not perfect. Like if the road changes its color, then for a moment you'd think, wow, there's something else. But then you just slow down so the laser can catch the obstacle, and that's fine. So here's a typical example. It's one of the early versions. And this just shows, as you take the straight road over here and do the trick, the laser goes about 20 meters out. This car's driving down. The dark red stuff is laser. But the vision goes all the way to 60 meters out. So all of a sudden, we could see much, much further and could detect obstacles much earlier. So that gave us the speed. I'm going to show you a video of the adaptation in action. This is taken from what's called the qualification event, where the vehicle had to go from pavement to grass. And you can see as it goes into the grass the first time, it doesn't quite know what it is, so it says not drivable. But as soon as it gets onto the grass, the laser catches the region of the grass. The vehicle adapts to it and is able to then find grass very reliable. So here's another transition that's going on. These are, of course, are obstacles. They're flagged correctly. Here's another one. This is a difficult section with hay bales. You can see the adaptation going on, and so on. And it was able to drive quite reliably. So some of the results that we got with the adaptive vision was really amazing. I teach computer vision at Stanford, and I tell the students vision doesn't work because it's really hard to make work. But this really adapted all the time for lighting conditions and road colors. So if the sun was down on the horizon, it would just have a different model and so on. And it worked actually quite amazingly well. The last thing we did is, after we were able to do 35 miles per hour, and this is very short, the problem we ran into is the vehicle was too fast. It was way too fast. So if you go into 280 and drive 30 miles per hour, that feels slow. But if you go into a very treacherous mountain pass with a big cliff on one side and a mountain on the other side, going that speed makes you feel you're crazy. So we had to find a way to make the vehicle go slower. Specifically what happened is, if we go into rough terrain, like big ruts or so, like washouts from the rain, and it would just go exactly the same speed, just like a robot, as it done in nice and benign terrain. So we had to find a way to make it slow down. And to cut a long story short, we worked on adaptive mechanisms for speed control. Before I show you those, let me one last time highlight what our competitors did at this wonderful place in Pittsburgh where I used to work for 8 years. They actually recognized this problem and had a team of
12 editors plus one management station.
Of of like 24 people in a trailer that would go through every inch of terrain and label it and tell it exactly what speed it should go based on aerial image they collected. And they had a vehicle in the desert for months on end to get lots of ground data. And they succeeded in labeling it, but we didn't have the manpower to do this, and we didn't feel that we wanted to really hand label all of this. So what we did is we used, again, machine learning, being excited now about machine learning, where we showed Stanley how fast to drive by just driving a stretch in the mountains, okay? And that was me driving, so the car got like a distinct German style of driving in the end. And then build a controller. This is the same figure, it's hard to see. The yellow stuff is human driving, the pink stuff is robot driving. Build a controller that kind of copied that. And the parameters of controllers was it was monitoring the amount of shock that the vehicle got, the steepness of terrain, and the narrowness. And it would then slow itself down to meet certain guideline parameters. And after it, say, received the shock, it would then slowly forget and get faster and faster again until it got a new shock. Oh, and it got faster again, new shock, faster again, a new shock, and so on. It wasn't quite human driving. I mean, typically humans slow down before a rut. This would kind of slow down after the rut, but still, like, ruts come in groups and so on, whatever. So with that, we had a system together in September where we did thousands or hundreds of miles of testing. In fact, there was a constant balance between spending more time in Arizona testing and making sure we don't get a divorce at home. And our wives still recognized us when we came back home. Or we would fly them in and they would hang out with us in Arizona. And the car was actually quite competent. It was not elegant. So the steering was usually a little bit later than people would do it. But we could drive hundreds of miles without any problem whatsoever. We did a 200-mile run in one day. And we could average speeds about 22 miles per hour roughly. Which in a desert, trust me, is a lot. So if you put yourself in the car, 22 miles is a lot. In fact, as Mike always observed, it's illegal to drive drunk, but it's completely legal to program your car when you're drunk and then be driven by it. So this is a couple of fun videos. Carnegie Mellon was a very serious competitor, and by all means, they have won just the same way we won it at Stanford, and I'll comment on this later on. But they did fantastic work. They didn't have a desert, but they have a lot of industrial wasteland in Pittsburgh, so they practice there. Berkeley, my friends from Berkeley, practiced their motorcycle. They had a new one, and they didn't quite get the. Now, when I show you these videos, I got a comment that I have an enormous respect for the people in Berkeley and Anthony Lewandowski in particular, in that. If you control a car and you want to steer it, all you do is you drag around your steering wheel that's turning, right? So if you do this on a motorcycle, as Chris knows, if you just drag around your steering wheel, you fall, right? Because you lose balance. So what you do is you steer in the opposite direction, you start falling, and then you catch your fall. That's the way you turn a motorcycle. So working this out on the control side was actually quite an achievement. But they had these are all videos on the web. You can download them. They had a lot of fun doing this, and they weren't the only ones practicing this maneuver. Carnegie practiced the same maneuver just before the race, and we had also our problems. So we had a day when we came into the Mojave Desert after a major rainfall, and the road was basically turned into a lake. And just by driving over that water, it would splash up, and you couldn't see anything. And the only thing you could see something were the lasers on the roof that were making all the decisions. So we're sitting inside there, realizing if there's a mistake in the software right now, you won't even be able to see it before we die. And this was maybe the only moment where you could at least say that, that the robot was better than human driving, just for this very short moment. And clearly the humans were insane to accept that. Well, come race time, and just to finish up here, the race itself took place in Fontana Speedway, and then in Primm in Nevada. Fontana was an event to basically select the final 20 last finalists. So we came with our blue T-shirts. We are blue because Carnegie Mellon picked red as a color, so we couldn't pick that anymore. So we looked like Berkeley guys. We had 2 cars. We had a full support of Volkswagen of America and so on. DARPA had made up a course that was about 2.2 miles long on the speedway. It had all kinds of challenges, I'll show you in a sec here, that kind of resembled the challenges you'd find in the desert. It wasn't really desert racing, but you could claim if a car wouldn't be able to make that course, then it wouldn't be able to succeed in the Grand Challenge. So they had a narrow gate that resembled one of the gates on the course, very narrow, which already half the teams couldn't negotiate that first gate, turned out. And then they had an abandoned car over here. There could be another robot just sitting there while you're passing it, maybe a disabled robot. and so on. They had a big open high-speed section where you could go as fast as you wanted, up to 50 miles per hour. So Stanley is going about 38 here. That's the place where Carnegie was consistently faster than us. We were somewhat more conservative on the speed side. And then the most difficult obstacle was actually a tunnel that they put up that emulated an underpass under I-15. Turns out we crossed I-15, but they couldn't go over a real highway, and they couldn't shut down the highway. So they made us go through these really narrow underpasses. The problem with the underpasses, you lose GPS coverage, so you lose track of where you are. You have to locally navigate. So that can kill you because you lose no sense where you are. What can also kill you is the moment you emerge from the tunnel, where you regain GPS, and then you realize you're actually somewhere else. And if you don't very carefully integrate your data, your map will look very, very funny afterwards. So this was the underpass. This is an emulation of a power pole. They wanted to test if you can go around a power pole, because on the race course was the power support for half of Los Angeles. And Tether had this fear that we might just knock out one of those, and Los Angeles would be dark, and DARPA would be famous for that, and so on. So we had to test that, and of course it went fine. Just to give you a feel for how difficult it was, this is just some random video from the web that Nova recorded. This is the local team dad, which did actually very fine in the race. But in the beginning, they had some difficulties with the hay bales, and they dug their own nest. Was pretty much it. They had a fantastic laser scanner on the roof that we're using now. Here's our motorcycle again, and be prepared for some amazing video. They got the control worked out, but not the perception, turns out. This was one of the most amazing moments. I did Raised from the Dead. Ghost Rider, bravely forged on. This is you guys here. Now, some people had an interesting solution to the GPS problem. Like, these guys, when they went out of GPS, went into full throttle. So in the tunnel, they accelerated to 60 miles per hour. And they almost, we had to get an ambulance for the Carnegie Mellon person sitting there. This is one of the very few videos that I have that Carnegie Mellon does something foolish, going over hay bales. We had an argument on this, not us, but Carnegie Mellon did. The sensors are miscalibrated. They fixed this afterwards. The robot went just fine. But in the beginning, you had this problem, and the judges said, you're going to lose points for this. And Red said, no, a Hummer can take hay bales. Don't see the problem. And then there were lots and lots of different teams that just didn't make the first gate. Or they made the first gate but didn't make the second, run into a car, like these guys. And you might laugh, but it just shows how hard it is actually to build systems that do this. This is a moment where we had 2 unmanned vehicles on the course, and so on, stuck in the underpass, rearranging the hay bales, what have you. This is an interesting team. So they had about 20 laser scanners up there, a university team that couldn't quite decide how to organize the software. So every student got one laser and one laptop in the trunk. And in the end, they all plugged their laptops together, and they took a majority vote over the drive. The race itself, actually, getting a little more serious here, unfolded on October 8th, and that was a big day for us. So here's Mike, our chief software guy, a mechanic from Germany, and one of the chief Volkswagen people. We got the race course on a CD. Yeah, we had some cow problems too. We got the race course at 4 in the morning, and we had exactly 2 hours to process it. So Carnegie Mellon would go into the trailer and do their hand labeling and added thousands of waypoints. We just basically smooth the course using a least square smoother, and then look at the data once, just define, well, it looks fine, plug it into the robot, and then talk to journalists, get some coffee, and so on. And then at 6:30, when the sun started rising, the race began. We were seated second after Carnegie Mellon. Carnegie Mellon had beaten us on speed in the pre-runs. And Carnegie Mellon was also third. They had 2 cars in the race. And this is the video of the race, parts of it, from this Nova movie here. And that's really a video that still, to the present day, provokes some emotions for me, because after working a whole year on this car and spending so much time inside the car, this was the first time the car went by itself. You see it sitting there, empty, in the morning. You trained it everything you know about driving, at least so you think, and now it has to stand its own man or its own car. Makes a little mistake in the beginning, a little nudge that was wrong, but then confidently goes off by itself, and within like 30 seconds, you lose sight of your car and it just disappears. It's kind of a bizarre feeling. You guys are all young people. When I give this talk to older folks, I often compare it to raising a college kid. Like raising a child, make it really perfect, and someday it's going to go into college, it's a different city, and you have to trust it to make the right decision and come back without dents and scratches or whatever. or not pregnant, whatever can happen in college. So it's kind of the same thing. You try to optimize this car and really anticipate every contingency. And now it's on its own, right? So, and it made a couple of stupid mistakes in the race, but it survived. So this is all footage that we didn't get, but a helicopter collected from Nova, which made a documentary. So you can see Stanley driving by itself without a person inside, lots of advertisement, of course. We were actually quite lucky. There were about 3 teams that very quickly took off Carnegie Mellon and us at about the same speed. In fact, we were slightly slower than Carnegie Mellon's fast vehicle. We just saw this one over here, which was the website. And somewhere over here, Carnegie developed an engine problem with their fast vehicle, and it slid down backwards a hill and never became really fast again. And that allowed us to pass it later on. This is Caltech. Caltech failed at a very sensational moment. Little GPS glitch. Team Dad had gotten stuck behind a rock the year before and not enough throttle. So this time they were determined to give as much throttle as they possibly could when they were stuck. So they did. Team Ensko is another one. They actually had a laptop come loose and lost all of perception in mile 10, but went all the way to mile 90. So this is the case when Carnegie Mellon got stuck, and Stanley just right behind it, closing the gap of originally 5 minutes difference in the starting time. So Stanley is kind of informally taking the lead here. And it was a complete act of randomness that Stanley actually won. It was really a failure of Carnegie Mellon's engine that made us win, and no more, no less than that. So we were for a while chasing Carnegie Mellon, and at mile 103, a really important moment for us, the organizers paused Carnegie Mellon and let us pass it. The way it worked is when you're being paused, it wouldn't count against, time wouldn't count against you. You save the time, but that way a passing vehicle would just pass a static obstacle, not a dynamic obstacle. So this video from our car looking at that, which we got later, and we were just in the tent sitting there, and all of a sudden the voice came, "Ladies and gentlemen, Stanley has just passed Highlander," and you can imagine like what effect this had on us and on other people. The last obstacle was this treacherous mountain pass over here, which only 5 vehicles reached. Stanley was the first to go down, and you can see it's fairly dangerous. There's a big cliff over here. It's about 200 feet low. It's harder than the first year's mountain pass, even though the entire course was easier than the first year. And Stanley has to make life or death decisions, I guess, and had to basically control its speed to not get too fast and avoid the berm, and do this for a couple of miles. This is the DARPA chase vehicle that just observes it and can stop it. And then when that happened, we all knew there was a chance for Stanley to actually come back, which was amazing. So we all lined up over there at the finishing line, and at some point you saw at a distance a helicopter, and then you saw a little dust cloud, and then you saw a little blue dot, and all of a sudden you realized, wow, your car is coming back after 130 miles. It was completely unbelievable and mind-blowing. And our car was first to come back, which was even better. So here's Stanley going to the finishing line. We're somewhere over there celebrating this really historical moment, I think, for all of us in robotics. Thanks. This, I'm going to comment on a little bit later on what it really means for me to have been involved. But this is just a little video that shows our adaptive vision in action. And this is the only man-made obstacle we encountered. It happens to be Carnegie Mellon's car, which is paused, so we can check whether the video actually works, and we actually catch it. You can see it's being classified as non-drivable, which the Hummer is. And you can see, I think AMG discontinued the H1 production since. You can see the shadow over here in the map and so on, just for amusement. But the interesting thing is, and I mean this very seriously, if you look at this chart, 5 teams finished, 4 within about half an hour of each other. All of these are equal winners. I mean, it's good to have the check, the money, and the fame, but technically, these differences of 11 minutes are completely insignificant, and it was completely random luck with the draw. We were all driving right at the speed limit. Some had an engine problem, some didn't, and that made the final decision. So it's really an amazing achievement for the robotics field, for which people said, seriously, this is absolutely impossible, and you get 5 cars finishing. Now, DARPA has begun to realize there's a new technology in the make that actually has some hope for society, and created what's called the Urban Challenge. I'm not going to say anything about it. You can read it up on the web. It's basically a challenge that deals with the city, and you have to drive from point A to B to C, and you encounter other cars along the way, and you have to interact with other traffic. And it eliminates one of the shortcomings we had in the Grand Challenge, which is there was no traffic. So this is really a test in traffic. So DARPA has announced what city it is. It might be Mountain View. It might be Palo Alto. Hopefully it's going to be some old military base maybe. But on November 3rd, 2007, together with Google, we're going to be competing and hopefully finishing. Yes?
It's going to be live? live traffic?
My interpretation is there's going to be two types of traffic. One is other robots, and the second one is military vehicles. But if it's military vehicles, it's going to be tanks, so that if your little Touareg runs into a tank, the tank won't even notice, right? So you have to worry about traffic detection and so on. Let me spend the last 2 slides on the big picture, why we actually do this. I mean, it's fun to get engaged in the competition, but there's a much broader picture behind all of this. I told you the military perspective, and there's a good amount of utility to this, given the number of people we lose, for example, to roadside bombs in Iraq these days. But what drives me more than that even, so is the societal perspective and what we can do to humankind with self-driving cars. And people sometimes don't quite realize this. Cars are deadly instruments. We kill about 42,000 people every year in the United States because of traffic accidents. 90% of those are caused by human error. Okay, so just in proportion, it's about 15 times as many people as September 11. And it's about as many people every year as all of Vietnam War for the United States. Okay, so every year we're losing Vietnam War again and again and again. And if you don't look into this, there's many other dimensions in which this kind of technology can help people. Commuting is another one, right? So we in the Bay Area know about this. The Beltway, Chicago, Los Angeles. People spend, on average, I think 1.25 hours per day commuting in a car. And that takes away, 10% of their work time. So if you could free that time, or people could still sleep, they could work, they could do email. I guess we do email anyhow when I'm driving, but they could do more productive things. They could actually make people significantly more productive, which I think would be a great effect on society. And there's many more dimensions in which you can turn this and spin this. I talked about saving lives and saving money, making people more productive. Here's the last one I want to really talk about. I guess that's obvious, aging population. People who can't drive right now, drunk people, old people, people with disabilities, blind people, children, and so on could possibly drive. This is an interesting one, highway throughput. If you look at the nation's highway systems, it's many places beyond capacity, like specifically in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles and so on. There's almost no new construction of highway infrastructure because people live there, you can't take their property away. So almost all the money goes into mass transit that is being invested, yet less than 1% of us use mass transit as a way to get to work. So if you take a picture of a busy highway at peak capacity when it performs the best, which is when people go about 45 to 55 miles per hour, and in the picture you count the number of pixels that are taken by car versus those that are still free, only about 8 to 10% is actually taken by cars, and 90% is still free. Why? Because we're lousy drivers. We can't really control our vehicle very well. There's space in front of us and on the sides, right? So what if you could increase this to, say, 16% by a self-guided car? You've doubled the capacity of the US highway system. You did something that otherwise would require trillions of dollars investments to reach, and for which we have no current plan. There's almost no new construction in this country, and there's a steady increase of 3% per year of highway use, which means 20 years from now it's going to be even more disastrous than it is today. So that's certainly a vision that I think this technology embraces that we should all care about. These are the type of things that we really pursue as motivating factors. At Stanford, we are now completely deeply engraved in winning the next grand challenge. It's going to be hard to do. It's harder than the previous one. It's going to be driving in traffic. If you see a funny Touareg coming through Mountain View that acts like a drunk squirrel, stay away. That's us. And visit us on November 3rd when we hopefully do a good job in the next grand challenge. Thank you.